Greetings, everyone. This is Sal Munoz, System Implementation Manager with All Chicago. Today, we are going to go ahead and talk about a relatively quick update to the SSVF assessments. So essentially, the gist of it is that we are going to be adding 3 additional questions on employment to the SSVF assessments. This should go relatively fast. I don't anticipate needing to stay here until for the full 45 minutes, so that'll give us plenty of time to go ahead and hop into questions. So let's go ahead and get started. A couple of housekeeping things before we go ahead. While I will not unmute anyone, if you do have questions, feel free to ask them. Considering that this is a relatively quick change that we'll be going over, I'm going to save all the questions for the end of today's at the end of today's webinar. So I will not be addressing them during the webinar itself, but rather at the end, because I anticipate that I'll be able to get through the content of our webinar relatively quickly. So we're going to start off by giving you a little bit of context as to why these questions are being updated at this point in time. Then we will quickly review the questions, and again, they're relatively simple. Then we will be talking about which clients these questions need to be answered for, and then we will end it off with any questions that may have been that may have come in during our webinar. So let's start off with a little bit of context. So these questions have been a part of the SSVF Export and need to be added to our current assessment. So they're all centered on employment, and they are actually supplemental to the questions that we already asked on income. So you may have already been answering questions on clients' employment and don't understand why these are necessarily in there. Well, these are additional employment questions that SSVF providers are asked to answer in addition to the monthly income questions that we ask as a part of every single assessment that we have on HMIS. And so some of you may have already noticed this. So when you go to do your SSVF export in HMIS, you'll notice right at the bottom here, I have it highlighted in red, that there are questions asking employed, employment type, not employed, reason. And if we look at the rightmost columns, the total records and error count, sometimes you may have noticed that they'll show all your records, and then every single one of those records has an error count for these questions. Well, the reason being is that these questions were not on the assessment at the time. So they're not currently on the assessment that you're using. And so you may be wondering why they're not on the assessment. Well, it turns out that the vendor did not put in the questions from the assessment that we copy over. So we are making this adjustment so that we are fully in line with the SSVF export. Now let's talk a little bit about the timeline of things. These questions are going to go live starting on Friday, March 1st. It will appear on the entry, update, and exit assessments because this is a question that will change over time, right? So your client may not be initially employed, but then they'll be employed 2 weeks into your project, or by the exit of your project, they'll have achieved full-time employment when they may have had part-time employment initially. So just keep that in mind. This question will be available in every single one of those assessments. And any clients coming in after March 1st or that are currently enrolled in your projects should have this question answered. So any clients that are incoming or that are currently on your roster, you want to ensure that these questions are going to be filled out for them. Now, it may also behoove you, if you do have the capacity to do it, to go back and answer these questions for any clients in the past reporting year. But I think going forward, for sure, please answer this question for any clients that are coming into your project or that are currently active in your project. So let's go ahead and review the questions. They're not super complicated. They are not questions that really require a lot of depth. You'll see that shortly. So the three employment questions are relatively simple. It's just asking, is the client employed? If yes, what type of employment, which is going to be tracking whether it's full-time, part-time, day labor, etc. And then if not, why are they not employed? So all of these questions are going to be in between the monthly income and the non-cash benefits section of your assessments. So let's go into the first question. Essentially, it's just, is the client employed? And the responses for that are yes, no, client doesn't know, client refused, data not collected. And again, this is relatively simple. It's not anything so out of the ordinary. I do want to mention that this differs from what is currently in our monthly income sub-assessment, in that this is looking directly for employment. It's not necessarily looking at whether or not they have income. This is asking specifically about employment. So something about SSI, if the client solely relies on SSI and doesn't have sporadic work or anything of that sort, then the client would answer no, that they're not employed, even if they do have that income coming in from SSI. And then if a client does indicate that they do have employment, we ask if that employment is full-time, part-time, seasonal, sporadic, which includes day labor. And so again, I just want to reiterate that this differs from the monthly income question. If a client is receiving SSI, that would have no effect on this question at all. This is looking directly at whether or not the client has a place of employment, and this is asking specifically if that client has a full-time position, part-time position, or a seasonal sporadic hours. And then if not, why are they not employed? It could be that they're looking for work, they're unable to work, or they're just not looking for work. So again, these are relatively simple questions that can change throughout a client's lifeline in your life cycle in your program. So who does this change apply to? Well, that's relatively simple. It's going to be any new coming. So these employment questions are collected for the head of a household and also for any adult members of that household. So if you have a household that has a head of household, their spouse, and 3 children, well then the head of household and the spouse will be collected. The provider should answer the questions for those 2 adults and not the children. And again, you're going to want to record these questions for any incoming clients, any clients currently on your roster that don't have any exit date. And again, if capacity is on your side, if you're able to do this, I'd recommend that you run the export, look at all those data errors, and it'll give you a list of clients which have a data error. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you look right here, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's an error count. You can go ahead and click that for your clients, and that error count you can work down that error count. It'll give you a list of clients which do not have the employed question currently answered. So let's go back. And again, I would recommend that you do that, though it is not necessary, but it's best to have this there. And it's an easy question to be able to infer from a client's file. You may already know whether the client's employed. Typically, this is already data that several providers are already collecting. So it might be easy for you to interpret this or be able to back answer this data. So now, again, it went by relatively quickly. I do want to show you what this looks like in Service Point currently. So let me log in. And I currently have a client enrolled in my SSVF project. So this is a dummy data, a fake client. And I'm going to go ahead and click on to All Chicago SSVF. And so while you will not see this on your assessment today, starting Friday, when you open up this assessment, you will see that these questions appear right in the middle. So they're always going to appear right between monthly income and non-cash benefits. And the reason being is that after you answer monthly income, typically you will have that fresh in your memory, so you'll be able to answer that right here. And so it'll be the same case in the SSVF update and the exit as well, that these questions will be nestled right between the monthly income sub-assessment and the non-cash benefit sub-assessment. So, folks, I think that is about it in terms of documenting the changes that we are going to be seeing, that you'll be seeing in regards to the client's employment status. So I will leave some time for you to send in your questions. Currently, we have none. But again, this was a really quick webinar. It took a lot sooner than I had anticipated. So please feel free to ask me any questions in regards to these new questions that are being added. So I'll be waiting about 2 minutes if you all would like. So feel free to just shoot in your questions whenever you can. Otherwise, I will be ending this webinar in about 2 to 3 minutes. Hi, Carrie. Yeah, it would be appreciated if you could go back and add the data for current clients. So Carrie George had asked, do we need to go back and add data for current clients? Yes, if you have the capacity to do that, please do so. Yeah, any clients currently on your roster, these questions are going to be recorded on your SSVF export. You're very welcome, Carrie. And folks, I also want to mention that I'm going to be posting this up to the help desk. I'll be sending you all an email come Friday when the changes go live, and I'll also have an article just sort of going over these changes. Again, these are nothing so difficult or so big, but we'll have the materials there for you so that you can onboard your employees.